Welcome to the C.L.U.E Principle, the podcast that shares stories from global leaders on how they leverage and apply empathic curiosity when creating leadership mastery. All right. Well, welcome everybody to the C.L.U.E Principle. Paul McLean here, the founder of Ignite Performance, and I am joined, thankfully, by Mr. Kevin O'Leary. And Kevin, most recently, was the Managing Director and APAC Regional CISO at JP Morgan Chase, based in Singapore. And absolute pleasure to have you here with us today, Kevin. Thank you for joining the podcast.
You're very welcome. I'm delighted to be here, Paul.
Fantastic. You're in sunny Singapore. Looks like you're enjoying the sun there.
Yeah, it's actually pretty sunny today, but the monsoon came on time this year. Though, funnily enough, it's been dry the last 3 days. So the last time, but I know if I water my plants, the heavens are going to open up and there'll be floods of water. So I don't know what to do. For the sake of my neighbors, I won't water my plants just yet. I'll leave it for the evening.
Fantastic. Well, Kevin, like I said, it's a great pleasure to have you on the podcast. And for those of you who don't know, this is actually our very first season, our very first episode to have Kevin. So it's a great pleasure
to be the first guest, I have to say.
There you go, first guest. I apologize, we haven't practiced before, but I'm sure everything will work very, very well. As you know, Kevin, the C.L.U.E principle is really this drive around empathetic leadership, and I guess people using and applying empathic curiosity as part of their everyday work ethic or approach, particularly people managers and leaders, of which you are, and you've had significant experience. So I wondered maybe we could sort of start. We're going to work through the letters. We're going to work through the C.L., the U, and the E. The first one being communication, and get some sort of questions and thoughts and feedback. So we'd love you to share examples of what you've experienced in your career to date.
So in terms of communication, I think that's the first letter. So we'll take our cue from that. So I think what I've learned over my whole career. Look, I mean, I'm not as young as I look, if I could put it that way. So I'd say so myself. But I started working 32 years ago. It was the first time that I went into a job. And if you count other jobs I did as a university student, etc., I've seen all sorts of management. And I think I kind of overlapped with some very old-fashioned styles of management. People that were coming towards the ends of their career had their 30 years or 40 years of experience, and they were applying that. So if you think about that, starting in the 90s, I was getting management principles that had been based in 1950s principles, so very, very traditional. So I think over the course of my career, I've seen that change. And it's not like things hadn't changed before then. There are many leaders who talk about, servant leadership, etc. It was a concept that really started in the 1960s. And a lot of it is actually based on Quaker values as well. And I think, any leadership, if you look at how Quakers approach management, you can see that in terms of what I've seen in terms of the Boland cafeteria in Dublin. Basically, this has been a system that's been around a long time, but maybe probably didn't have a lot of examples that we could look at, until right now. So if you think about it in terms of in terms of that communication part, I think what's really important is to understand that as a manager, it's not about being dictatorial. I think that if you're going to, really manage people, you have to understand them and listen to them and understand that they're unique. Since every person is unique, that means that if you're going to get the best out of them, you have to understand what makes them tick. And the only way you're going to get that if you actually understand what they think and what they feel. So I think it's really important to have that two-way communication so that you're very clear in terms of what you're looking for and what the expectations are, and set them very clearly, but also get feedback from the people who work for you to understand how are they going to approach it. Do they understand it? Do they have a different opinion? And I think it's very important to listen to the opinions of others, and especially your subordinates, because they're the ones on the front line. And what happens in management is that you start off as being a team leader, then you get a management of a small team, but you're still a doer, still working alongside them. And then you start getting into more executive positions. And once you're in those executive positions, you're not in the front line anymore. And then if you're an executive, as I've been for the last 14 years, you get to a point where you really can't do the job anymore on the front line. So you need to take their opinion. You need to understand what's possible and what's not possible. Because in those 14 years that you've moved further and further away from actually rolling up your sleeves and having a hand on the keyboard, if you're in tech or whatever the industry is, that you've lost that kind of muscle memory that they have, right? You're seeing things more strategically. So you have to understand the tactical level, and they're the ones who provide you with that. So that's why it's really important that you listen to the teams. And that means the negative as well as the positive, and to understand that sometimes you will learn things, sometimes it'll help you not to make a mistake. But other times it'll be a case of saying, I've listened, I've heard what you've said, I understand your concerns, but actually I am still the boss and I have to make the decision, but I own the decision. You've told me if there's a problem, it'll be my problem, not your problem. So that's why it's really important that you do that, because then people can see that you're being authentic in terms of understanding their concerns. You're taking it on board, and they need to understand the buck stops with the manager. So if you decide that something has to be a certain way, and if it goes wrong, well, that's on you, not on the people doing it, right? You're the one in charge.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up some interesting points there, particularly when you were talking about communication to listening, which sort of brings us on to the L of the C.L.U.E principle. But you mentioned then listening to other people's thoughts and opinions. So it's not just yourself, not just what Kevin thinks and drives with, but you're conscious, I guess, of the importance of listening to people as part of that two-way communication.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And I remember when I worked at Hewlett-Packard, we did a whole course on active listening. Now, that was much more in a kind of a client perspective. But the one of the things that they taught us on active listening is that we as human beings, I mean, everybody's different, right? Obviously, but the vast majority of people, when they're in a context with people, whether it's a one-on-one or there are people in a group, and sometimes it's often worse if there's a group of people, the only thing they're listening for is a break in the conversation to give their opinion. That's what the listening is all about, right? So it's like, okay, then this person's there and they're going blah blah blah. I've heard some of it, but not all of it, and I've understood less of it. But I have my opinion, and I'm going to make sure I get that across. Now, that could be contextual, right? So it depends on why you're in that meeting, why you're in that situation, what you're trying to get across. You're anxious to shine, or there's an important message you have to get understood. So it's natural that you have that feeling, and sometimes that might be appropriate in actual fact to be a bit like that. However, the most important thing is that you have to be able to listen so you can pivot. So to listening to people is really important, and active listening is a skill that you have to teach yourself in actual fact. And what it takes is, sometimes you have to sit on your hands. Paul, you know me a long time. I'm a big talker, and I could possibly overpower a room with the amount of talking that I do. So I've learned over the years that actually, I need to sit on my hands, figuratively, and just listen and try to take things on board. I bring a notepad and I write a few notes down, and I'm not trying to take down every point that people make, but sometimes it's a point that I want to make in response to what they've said. Right. And that's absolutely fine. But if you're doing that, you are actively listening, because you're listening to them so you can do something that's like a rebuttal or something like that,
Yeah.
So it's absolutely essential that you do that. And in a group setting, that you let others speak and you listen to them, and everybody listens to each other. It's hard in very long, boring meetings. Of course it is. But the point is, there's an aspect of respect. First of all, that you respect everybody's view. The other point is that you have people who have amazing opinions, amazing insights, and have a lot to say, but may be quite shy and may not want to speak up as a group or within a group. So they feel overpowered by the people who are taking up and sucking all the oxygen out of the room. So when I run meetings, I try to make sure that everybody is listened to, and I keep an eye out to see who's being the quietest and not to put them on the spot, but just to make sure that if they have something to say, they should say it. The most important thing is
Right.
that you really shouldn't be speaking unless you really have something to say. Otherwise, you're
Right.
just wasting time. You know, that's
Right.
really important.
Yeah, I think it's critical. I've experienced similar things myself. I mean, obviously, to do that, the observation or the mindset, your mindset from observing, like genuinely observing people, needs to be really at the forefront, right? I mean, otherwise, you're not doing justice to the voices that are being, heard in the room, whether it's a one-to-one or a group conversation.
Yeah,
How have you
I think.
found building that capability?
Well, I think the one thing is that just as we are today, so much of what we do is on Zoom now, and that's obviously what came out of COVID. I've been using Zoom or equivalents, for a long time, Skype or what have you, for a long time because of the nature of my job was always kind of global. And actually, I think I was probably a pioneer working from home. I spent years working at home earlier on in my career, using video conferencing in the early 2000s. So the problem being that you get this kind of community squares aspect, and
Yeah,
and it kind of it makes people you're more able to be distracted, you're more able to be ignored, because if people are doing a presentation, you actually don't see who's on screen. And even if you insist people show the screen, once you get more than 5 or 6 people, suddenly it's just these little boxes all over the place. Sorry, I have to cough. So I think what I like to see is even in this hybrid model, as many people as possible should be in the room together. That's one thing that's very, very important. And when we did go back into the office, I insisted that not that everybody come into the office, not at all, because that's not what was happening at JP Morgan. It's 3 days a week for most people. For MDs, it's 5 days, but that's life. But for everybody
right.
else, it was 3 days a week. And I think that whoever was in the office, I wanted them to come in because I always found it ridiculous to have people sitting beside each other on a screen talking in the same meeting. It sounded just crazy to me. So I think we have the technology, we should be using it, but I think that human interaction is really important. You get so much more out of a face-to-face meeting, because you have the walk to the meeting room, you have the walk out of the meeting room. It's more relaxed, and you can see body language, etc. And also, you
Yeah.
don't have the feeling of staring at a mirror the whole time, right? This is one of the things. Like,
Yes.
we have ourselves up here on the screen. You want to look at yourself and say, "Do I look good enough? Am I Zoom presentable or whatever?" And it's actually psychologically, very tiring for people to go through that. So I think that that's one of the pressures in terms of this kind of communication and meeting style and meeting and listening to people and having
Mm,
those interactions is to try and take the pressure off as much as possible. Um,
right.
and to make sure that people are in a space where they can be themselves and be authentic, which is kind of hard sometimes, especially on Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. I think the genuine nature too of being face to face. I think mentally it actually prepares people in a different way.
Yeah,
Also,
absolutely.
you're also looking for cues. You can look people in the eyes and
Yeah.
start to get a different sense of people, even as opposed to being on camera,
Yes.
and or people being off camera, is also a factor, right? So
Well,
no, it's interesting.
when I was at General Electric, I remember we didn't have any video cameras unless we were in the office. They had the Cisco kind of links, so but that was
Right,
seen a bit ridiculous for me because all the people I talked to were in the US when I was in China, so it didn't make any sense because they were in bed when I was in the office. But we didn't do any video calls, even when it was possible. Everything was just an audio call. And
mm,
I can't remember if that was a conscious decision or not, but I think mostly it was just that. It was easier to set up. It was less intrusive on people. When you're at home and you have to find a place to put up your Zoom camera, not everybody's living in a place where you're lucky enough, like me, to have a home office. Not everybody has that, and you're at the kitchen table or something else. So even with
right,
background, it makes people a little bit self-conscious. So I think
yeah,
that sometimes camera off, and I think during the worst of COVID, when people had spent months and months at home, there was a movement on like at least one day a week it would be camera off day, so that
right,
people could just hear the voice,
yeah,
listen to what they're saying, and not be staring at
yes,
the person.
yeah, very true, very true. You shared as part of obviously the listening component. You talked there about obviously taking notes, and the U part of the CLUE principle obviously is about really listening to understand people. Give us your thoughts around, I guess, that approach of really truly understanding people. What has that helped you being able to do as a leader, instead of just having your opinion, your approach, but getting that extra insights and extra input from other people?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. So when I talk about taking notes, some people are better than others. I'm not actually a great note taker. What I tend to write down are questions. Like, so somebody says something, I have to say is a question to myself. Did I truly understand that? Do I need to follow up now or later? That kind of thing, right? Some of the things that get discussed are highly complex. And for a leader, you have to understand things in the moment. And also, there's a lot of context switching that happens throughout your day. The more responsibility or accountability you have across locations or people or functions, the more that every meeting is a different meeting every day. And that makes it quite exciting, but it also makes it very hard to kind of keep track of everything, and to really understand it. So you have to kind of jump into a moment, into one context, and then be taken to another. So an example being a regulatory exam, a regulatory issue, an audit issue, which is a lot of documentation and policy and writing, etc., and reading, etc. And then going from that to an architectural design, technology design meeting, where now you're talking about technology and bits and bobs and IPs, and you're talking a different language essentially. And I think that's where taking some notes and really trying to listen and understand what's happening within the meeting, and asking for people to repeat it and actually repeat it back to people. So like, people will explain something to me and I'll say, okay, if I've understood, and I'll say back to them, this is what that means. And I'll repeat what my understanding was back to them. That gives them an opportunity to correct my mistakes. And as a leader, sometimes people are reluctant to do that because they say, well, I don't want to look stupid to my team. Like, so if they say something I just don't understand, right? But honestly, it's better to be in the moment and say, actually, I don't quite understand that. Can you explain it to me? And sometimes I say to my team, explain it to me as if you're trying to explain it to a 3-year-old, right? It's just, if big box go to small box and small box go to big square, explain it that way, with visuals, whatever, because I truly don't understand, or my head isn't in it. And a lot of that is because of context switching, and your team will understand that. They'll know that you've gone to a big audit meeting or whatever, and then suddenly you're talking technology. They will understand that, and they'll appreciate the fact that you're honest enough to let them know that you didn't fully understand. But you should leave the meeting understanding. You know what I mean? So that means if they have to explain it to you 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, that's fine. That's much better than walking out of there not understanding what the team has said, and then doing something that lands them in it, or that makes you look foolish further on down the line, right?
Right.
There's no foolishness. There's no bad questions in meetings like that. If you're afraid to open your mouth, it means that you're not working in an environment of psychological safety. So psychological safety is it's a concept really that says that you should be able to say, obviously within boundaries, should be acceptable things that you say, but you should be able to apply your opinion, or say you don't understand something, or have something explained to you. Those are, highly functioning teams in well-managed companies. That's the culture that allows people to understand that, yes, sometimes I don't understand, sometimes it needs to be explained to me. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, no matter how senior I am or how much respect I think I'm due, right? There are no badges or hierarchy in a meeting when you're trying to solve a problem, right? That's really that.
Right. Yeah, I hear in your response there this a genuine, element around, humanity, that we're all human beings. Whilst you may hold a higher level position in an organization, the opportunity exists, for us as people leaders to really engage with people and understand what can they potentially bring to the table. Do they have a hidden genius that I wasn't aware of? But of course, by opening a communication channel in the right, genuine way, things change for the better, for you, for the company, for the other individuals. as well.
So I think that's a really important part in terms of where you sit within a company, and to understand that people get very caught up on titles, and the titles are generally a kind of a marker of where you are in your career, but that doesn't mean that's a marker of who you are as a person, right? So, and I think that when you're looking at it, you have people who are starting out in their career, and they could say, oh yes, they're very junior, but they have some very good ideas. The junior thinking, I've heard this many times in my career. Oh, the junior thinking, not thinking like a manager, not the junior thinking is when you get very closed off in a view, and you're not willing to see the bigger picture. So you only see your part of the problem, and then you think that's the whole issue, rather than looking and saying, well, I'm only one small cog in a small wheel in a very big machine, right? So I'm fixing the small cog, right? But the manager, as you go further out or up the scale, that management level means you should be seeing the bigger picture all the while, right? So this junior thinking, I've seen it at the very top of companies. I've seen it. So that's what I mean when I say junior thinking. Junior thinking is, I'm not looking at the bigger picture. I'm only looking at what this issue is here in front of me, and that because of behavioral thing. And quite frankly, a lot of senior people get their jobs because they're very, very good. That's the vast majority of people. But there are plenty of managers get their job because they were in the right place at the right time. They said the right thing to the right person, and then they ended up in a managerial position, and then they built from there. And good luck to them. That's fantastic that they've done that. But that doesn't mean that they suddenly become geniuses. It doesn't quite work in that way, right?
Yes.
And the other side I would say to as well is it's not in the clues, that would make it a very weird word, but authenticity I think is really important, and I think that's where the empathy comes in too, right? So being authentic. So I've been in other parts of my career. I've gone into meetings when I was as a vendor, gone into a company with a whole name, that wouldn't be fair, but gone in and been berated by people in the room saying your service was terrible, this that didn't arrive on time, why aren't you doing this? And getting quite personal and really being quite hateful. I thought, this is my feeling, and actually being quite unprofessional. And then the meeting comes to the end, and they'd suddenly say, "Oh, well, okay, do you want to go for beer?" As if our meeting hadn't happened, right? And to me, like, when you see that kind of behavior, that means that's not people who are being authentic. I mean, we all have different faces, different ways that we approach, our wife, our kids, our friends, our colleague, our club mates if we're in a sports team. So these are all different facets of our personality. But you can still be that authentic person and say that I'm the same person you find in that meeting as you find outside of the meeting. That's what's really important.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I think too, if we think about the E of the C.L.U.E principle, which is empathy, as you rightfully mentioned, it's this approach where you're putting yourself in the shoes of other people, which is really the explanation around what empathic curiosity is. And I'm fascinated by the word curiosity because long term in the sales world and training salespeople and professionals and leaders, we always talk about being curious. But from a leader perspective, what are your thoughts about that application of putting yourself in the shoes of other people? You've given some really good examples there of that, but give us your thoughts around empathy and how these three tie together to sort of deliver that.
I think I follow Stoicism, right? That's my religion, so to speak, right? So I'm a great believer in Stoicism, and it's very misunderstood because people think of it in terms of great hardship and showing a plain face of great hardship and all that, but actually not really. I mean, what Stoicism teaches you is that the only thing that you can control are your own emotions, right? You can control yourself. You can't control other people. So and understanding how you can manage how you feel and know that the things are going on in your life, what's in your control, that's for you. What's out of your control are other people. And that means that curiosity comes with saying, well, I can't change them. I can't make them be different. They can only make themselves be different, right? But I need to find out a little bit about them to understand what makes them tick and to understand who they are. And it doesn't mean being intrusive. We don't go to work to make great friends. You end up with great friends at work very often, of course, right? But it doesn't mean that that's the goal. You're there to work with colleagues respectfully And
Mm.
sometimes you are going to be friends with them, sometimes not. But whatever happens, it should always be done in a feeling of respect. Because the point being is that, if you get into some kind of a disagreement at work, whatever the issue is, you've got to remember that everybody in that room has to get up, go out, get on the bus or get in their car or get on the metro and go home to their family or their girlfriend, or maybe they live alone, maybe there's only a little puppy dog or whatever. But they leave the office and then they're a whole different person, that whole different life, right? So we've got to really focus in on what's important for people, and work is probably the least important in terms of who they are as a person. It takes up so much of our time. The majority of our time is spent at work, right? So it should be as pleasant as possible, but it shouldn't be what defines you. And I think that having that kind of empathy for people is really, really important, because another way to look at it is to talk about trust and how you build up trust. And I think if you're going to follow this C.L.U.E principle, which I wouldn't have put it in those terms necessarily, but like when I was looking at it, I could say that it resonates with me on every aspect, because I think that's how I've ended up. It's not how I started. I've made plenty of mistakes, and I haven't been the greatest boss
you
ever.
And me both.
Consistently, but I think I'm learning, and I think as I continue to learn, that's one thing that I've understood, is that you just have to be respectful with everybody in the workplace, and understand where they're coming from, and not to be, I'd say, not to take things too personally either. That it's very much a kind of a communication and an understanding. And work should be as pleasant as possible. But if they'll call it fun rather than work, so
Yes.
it has to be a place where things get done as well. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've seen my own example of a leader sharing, being extremely vulnerable, and seeing the dynamics in the room of that team change. And it was in areas around team performance. But what I have always noticed is that if the leader, I suppose, starts and sets that tone and that example, knowing some of the other people, I could see them, they were writing notes. They were sort of dynamically changing. They were potentially going to answer with A, and they ended up answering with Z, because they also felt all of a sudden a bit more comfortable. Maybe they're in a more trusting environment, which is what you mentioned.
Yes, that's psychological. That's psychological safety that you feel, and if people feel they're in that area, people can put other ways, the circle of trust, or whatever way you want to put it. But the point being is that you must feel that when you're at work, you can do your work, that people aren't like over your shoulder, staring at you to see, is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done? You know what I mean?
Yes.
That people allow you to do that work, and how you do it is up to you. The outcome is what matters. There's not a single job in the world where the method is more important than the outcome, right? And everybody finds a different way to get to that outcome. So as a manager, you have deadlines, you have quality, you have all of these things that you're concerned about. If your team are hitting quality and the outcomes are there, quality and deadlines are being met, and customer satisfaction is being met, and all of those things are being met, then it's not your job to go around policing how they are actually doing the work, right? Unless you feel that they're working too hard, which I think is very important, to look at your teams and say, they should not be working more than the hours we said they would be working. So if that's 8 hours a day, make it 8 hours a day. If they're working 12 hours a day, there's a problem. You need to hire more people. That's
right.
Or they need to work in a different way. Then you can help them. That's a different thing. But honestly, it's very important that you let people just be themselves, essentially.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think it's been a fascinating conversation, but I'd love to get your thoughts on any tips, sort of any final tips, thinking about what we've just gone through with the C.L.U.E principle, but anything that comes to mind that has, I guess, made a great impact on not just you, but the people around you, the people that you manage, the people you work with.
Yeah, I think taking yourself out of your own situation, right? So the way I put it is that we spend a lot of time on particular topics. For me, it's been cybersecurity or related, or technology controls, or things to do in those different aspects. So you talked about curiosity before. I've been lucky enough to work in many different industries, in terms of aviation and in industrial settings, manufacturing, finance. All of these things have come because of that feeling of curiosity. And I think that having that ability to kind of break out of the here and now and to widen your scope into different areas is really important, and to bring that into the workplace to a certain degree, right? Bring that knowledge and understanding. So for me, as you know, I'm passionate about history, so I read a lot of history. That teaches me an awful lot. It teaches me about the culture where I'm living, understanding, where I am means that I can be better for the people who are working for me. So here in Singapore, I had to learn a lot about Singapore, and then having customers in China and in Thailand and all over, I of course had to find out about their cultures as well, so that I could operate within those cultures. So I think widening your scope is very important, because once you understand things, outside of your own experience, then that means you're open to new experiences and open to new attitudes from people, and that makes you a more open person, in my view.
Yeah, and I think that baseline would then play into the one-on-one, so inside the corporate environment, the day-to-day as well. If you've got a regional view, like you just mentioned, it would literally cascade into the same type of mindset that's required to understand this person, this one versus this one, and this one.
Yes.
And culture in the workplace as well, which is of fundamental importance.
Absolutely, and saying for both of us, that you're at least from Australia. Well, I am originally from Australia, but which is a long story. We don't have time to go into that. But but I grew up in Ireland, and then coming to the region and being here for the last 15 years or so, it's been a big learning curve for me, because just to understand the nuances and the different cultural differences between people in the region. It's honestly it's been a real eye opener, and it's a joy to be here in the region, and I keep learning it. Like I've only been here 15 years. I think it would take a whole lifetime to even get close to understanding 10% of what makes this region tick. Yep.
Well, Kevin, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on our very first episode of the C.L.U.E Principle, and capturing your insights from many years of experience in leading and managing people. Really appreciate your openness and trusting us with your word going out to the world. And I hope that our listeners can pick up some interesting elements and examples that they can apply tomorrow in their practice around the C.L.U.E Principle.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure. And I'm fully on board with the C.L.U.E Principle. I think it's a great approach. So thank you very much, Paul.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it.